So welcome to Module 5 of Pathophysiology. In this module, we're going to be looking at disorders of the pulmonary system. If you remember, the pulmonary system is the same as the respiratory system. And the function of the respiratory system is to bring in oxygen, and that's important for us if you remember that oxygen is necessary for our aerobic respiration to generate energy. At the same time, our respiratory system allows us to get rid of carbon dioxide, which is a waste. And we need to get rid of that carbon dioxide because it ties to our homeostatic balance of pH. So in this module, we're going to be looking at the anatomy that allows us to control this gas exchange. And we're going to then move into looking at what we call the bronchial tree, our lungs, and then all the way down to that microanatomy of looking at the alveoli and the capillaries that surround it, which are our what we call the respiratory membrane. And that's where gas exchange actually occurs. After we look at those structures, we'll get into the physiology of looking at ventilation and our breathing mechanics. And then as we move on, we'll be taking a look at pathologies that have to do with things that affect our ventilation and our ability to have gas exchange. Many of those diseases actually lead to the body not being able to bring in oxygen and not being able to eliminate carbon dioxide. And eventually, because carbon dioxide is tied to our body's pH, it leads to pH imbalances. And so we'll be ending this module by examining the respiratory system's job in helping our body to regulate pH. The respiratory system includes the two lungs in the thoracic cavity, the conducting airways that allow for exchange of the gases, and the associated blood vessels. The main function of the respiratory system is to supply the body with oxygen for aerobic respiration or the generation of ATP, and dispose of the carbon dioxide generated from the metabolic processes of the body. The reason why we have to get rid of the carbon dioxide, if you remember, carbon dioxide is tied to pH. And if carbon dioxide increases in the body, it decreases the pH of the body, or it becomes acidic. So we need to have exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide for our body to maintain homeostasis. There are also other functions of the respiratory system. So it does aid in speech and vocalization as we push air in and out. Because it involves our nasal cavity, it gives us and helps us with our sense of smell. Like I mentioned before, tying carbon dioxide to pH, it's going to be controlling the body's fluid pH by monitoring and helping to eliminate or retain carbon dioxide. In the lungs, there is an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme, and that's an angiotensin II activator, and that helps to regulate our blood pressure. Breathing creates pressure gradients for flow of lymph and venous blood between the thorax and abdomen. And then also holding our breath can help us to expel abdominal contents. And so that's called the Valsalva maneuver. So for instance, that's used in labor or birth and also for bowel movements. The respiratory tract can be divided into upper and lower respiratory tracts. So those structures that are in the head and neck are considered to be the upper respiratory tract. And those are conducting pathways as they allow air to travel down into the lungs. So the structures that we consider part of the upper airway include the nasal and oral cavities, the pharynx or throat, and the larynx, or where our voice box is located. So those structures work to warm and humidify the air, and that actually helps the lungs to expand and inflate. There are hairs in the nasal cavity that can help to filter out particulate matter and trap foreign particles from being able to come down into the lower respiratory tract and into the lungs. The lower airway or respiratory tract includes the trachea, the right and left or primary bronchi that lead into the lungs, the secondary bronchi that lead into lobes of the lungs, and then all of those branching bronchioles. The function of the lower respiratory tract structures is to lead to gas exchange. So those bronchioles lead into what we call terminal bronchioles, and then alveolar ducts, and eventually into alveoli. Remember, those are those grape-like looking structures. Similar to the upper respiratory tract, the lower respiratory tract structures have important functions for the health of this organ system. So there are irritant receptors present that can cause the coughing reflex and bronchospasm, and that helps to limit exposure to toxins or cold. The trachea contains the mucociliary system, and that helps to trap foreign particles in mucus, and then it moves that mucus up the trachea and down into the esophagus so it can be eliminated in the GI tract. That keeps these bronchi and the alveoli clear of debris. As we move through the respiratory tract, you can see in this picture the epithelium keeps changing, and also you can see the amount of smooth muscle is going to be changing through structures as well. The changes in structure reflect changes in the function. So the bronchi, which are the large passageways that lead into the lungs, they are pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and they have cilia. And remember that cilia is there to move mucus towards the esophagus. The bronchioles have smooth muscle underlying that epithelium, and that's going to allow them to contract or dilate to start to control airflow. There's no cartilage here like there were in the bronchi. And so because there's the absence of cartilage, they have movement. And the alveoli are the thinnest, and so they are only made of a squamous epithelial cell. And that allows for the easy passage of gas exchange with the blood and the surrounding capillaries. The alveoli create what's called the air-blood barrier, and it's only about 0.5 micrometers thick. So to give you an idea, that's 15 times thinner than a piece of tissue paper. The respiratory membrane is made of alveolar and capillary walls with their fused basement membranes. In adult lungs, it's estimated that there are 300 million alveoli, and that gives us a very high surface area onto which to exchange the gases. The alveolar walls are a single layer of squamous epithelial cells, and the majority of them are called type 1 cells. Scattered throughout are another type called type 2 cuboidal cells, and they secrete surfactant. Surfactant is a detergent made of lipid and proteins. At any gas-liquid boundary, which is what we have in the alveoli, the molecules of the liquid are going to be more strongly attracted to one another, and that creates surface tension. This would cause these alveoli to collapse, and that would stop the air exchange. The surfactant decreases the cohesiveness of the water molecules that are present in the alveoli, and then it allows them to remain open. We know the importance of the surfactant because of what we see in premature infants. The infant respiratory distress syndrome is caused by premature infants not having adequate surfactant in the alveoli. So the surfactant is not really produced until the last 2 months of fetal development. So very premature infants will have issues inflating the alveoli because of the surface tension created by the water in the cavity. The basement membranes of the epithelium that makes up the alveoli and the capillary are fused. And so that's going to allow us for very easy gas exchange. There are also macrophages present, and these can activate the immune system and also act to clear away any debris that does make it down into the alveolar cavity. The structures of the respiratory tree are surrounded by cartilage, and this allows them to have a strong structure that will remain open under the changes that we experience with gas pressure as we breathe in and out. So they won't collapse. Think about if you've ever played with a straw that you can drink out of. So if you were to put the straw in your mouth, close one end with your finger, and suck the air out of that straw, it would collapse, right? Because there's no strong structure to keep it open. That's what would happen to our respiratory tree, and then we would not be able to exchange gases. So these structures have to remain open, and that's what the cartilage does. So we can see the trachea that leads into the lungs, and it branches. And so it has the right and left bronchi. And these lead into the hilum of each lung. The secondary bronchi, or lobar, are going to split from that primary and supply each lobe of the lung. So on the right lung has 3 lobes. The left lung has 1 less. It has 2 lobes. Remember that the lungs are asymmetrical, and that's because the left side has to accommodate the heart. The bronchi branch again into tertiary or segmental branches, and those eventually lead into the smallest bronchi called the bronchioles. Their terminal branches eventually enter into alveolar ducts, and then they terminate in the actual alveoli.